Yeah. I don't know. I forgot what I was going to say. Never mind.
So the next questions have to deal with the BATNA and the ZOPA. So I think, does anybody want to say what they define those as, like how they define those in their own words?
Yeah. Well, like my take on a BATNA is just, well, at first I had to look up the acronym, and my understanding of what it means is that it's a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So the way I see it is that it's like the best that one party's side can fare if the other side refuses to agree to their ideal terms and is their bare minimum. So it's essentially like a party's lowest agreed upon value that they can come to terms with the opposing group in the negotiation process. That might not make sense, but that's kind of the way I understand it.
Yeah, I kind of took it like it's their second best option to the other.
Yeah, I guess some of the reading that I was doing, and I think that that definitely makes sense. I think that's kind of the ultimate goal is what you stated. It sounded like the way that they came to get to BATNA is they look to see what's the best deal I can get if I wasn't doing an agreement with these guys. What's the best I can get with a third party? And if they say a third party is going to pay me $20 million, and that's the best deal I'm going to get from another agreement, well, then that's my BATNA is right there. That's the lowest that I will go with in this contract. And so I want more than that. But that's the lowest I can go because I can get that elsewhere. And so that was kind of my understanding is it's kind of what can you get from a third party? The best you can get there, that kind of sets your floor.
Oh, Robert, what did you put?
So I did not do this assignment. I used my mulligan. I think I agree with what you guys said about that. I mean that's pretty much how I'd perceive that.
Like what a BATNA is?
Yeah.
I was just thinking it's what you're gonna do if don't work out, like what you're saying. It helps you you establish where you're gonna draw the line. What you're willing to accept and what you're not going to accept.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to definitely have this thought out before negotiations even begin.
Yeah, so it doesn't.
You want to like aim high, but be what?
Well,
you want to aim high, but be realistic.
Slide around. The problem that I saw is that from year to year, the BATNA was just all over the place, and they were both like moving that ZOPA and BATNA it was just moving like crazy, and from year to year, it just got kind of the tension built up, and it got to be this big crash. One of the articles that I looked at talked about WATNA, which is a WATNA, which is also something they said to configure or consider in the process, which is a worse alternative to a negotiated agreement. So it's good to say what would happen if we just completely had an impasse, and also put that on the table. And it seems to me like their WATNA is exactly where they ended up, right? Without the league playing that year, which seems like a pretty terrible alternative, but the one that they had to arrive to since they couldn't agree to terms.
Perfect. So I think a ZOPA kind of falls in that same line. What I put was it's like the common ground between the two parties where they're able to make a compromise. So like the things that they're able to compromise on together.
It benefits both parties, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, each party is going to have their things that they don't want to compromise on, but there are a few things that they could say, okay, well, I'll do this if you do this, and, is that kind of what everybody else was thinking?
The common ground.
Yeah.
The overlap.
It's like if you're going to put it like on a line graph, it's the shaded area that the two parties would find an agreement inside of, somewhere a dot on that shaded area.
Right.
Yeah. So, is it possible to change another person's ZOPA? Do you think?
Sure.
I think so. I think it I think you can have like an overall range of agreement, but then like within that you'll have certain aspects, right? So like this is super, super, super important to me, but if you move on this, I might be willing to move on that, right? So, you know, new evidence might change that, or, you know, a willingness to compromise in an area where they weren't able to compromise before. You'd be like, oh, okay, well, if you're, you know, like with the issue of the salary cap, you know, it's like, okay, so, you know, the league was super insistent on tying salary to revenue. Okay, well, once the players finally broke and were willing to accept a salary cap, they're like, oh, well, maybe we don't need to tie it to revenue since we have the salary cap, right? So I do think there are parameters where that zone can change a little bit.
Perfect. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking about that because I would agree too that, you know, if you are a skillful and like masterful negotiator, you probably could get them to slide their Zopa around a little bit, but you have to be really good at it. You know, like what you were just saying, Robert, like those are good ways of describing how someone might do that. And like, I read this the whole time and I was like, what a mess. And I just feel powerless in some negotiating situations. I'm just like, man, I need to read a book about this or something.
You know, I come across negotiating kind of a lot at the Home Depot with the Mexican culture nearby. And it's like, bro, we don't negotiate here. This isn't, so I have to deal with it kind of a lot. People
so
really want to.
You got your Home Depot Zopas and Batnas, huh?
Yeah. I get kind of annoyed though. Like, we don't, I don't know.
Shopping
I used to now.
Though, because you can't.
Now I just kind of ignore it.
Yeah, I think it could, like that's an interesting thing that you bring up, Susan, because, you know, like there's some areas where you kind of expect that, right? Like we'll go to like a flea market or something. It's like,
right.
Well, no one ever expects you to just take the price, right? That's part of the fun of going to a flea market.
Right.
But then there's, and it's just interesting in our society in the U.S. and in our culture, you know, like there's some areas where that's okay, and there's some areas where it's just like, okay, that's your price, and we just accept that, right? Or like buying a new car, right? There's so much negotiation back and forth, but buying new tires for your car, like that's the price. I can't negotiate. Like Discount Tire doesn't care if I say, well, hey, I'm going to come back here for my next set of tires. They're going to say, well, yeah, this is our special. Take it or leave it. It's just an interesting thing that, you know, how we kind of have that sort of.
Sorry, I don't know what I feel. So, what were you saying? You lost me. Sorry, I lost myself. I accidentally.
I kind of trailed off. I kind of forgot the point of what I was saying.
Oh, it's okay. Fun that way.
I just think it's interesting that this, in some aspects of our culture and society, in some places, like it's expected and encouraged to haggle or negotiate. In some areas, it's not. It's, you know, like you wouldn't go into a restaurant, you know, with, you know, seafood listed at market price. Well, the market price is much too high. How about $41 for that lobster tail, and I'll buy an appetizer to go with it, right? I mean, don't do it. It's an interesting thing that we've kind of made that split.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I think
tough.
we've already answered the next question as well, about barriers. I think that kind of has to do with how you would change another person's Zopa. Like there are certain things that you have to do to make them want to change that. But what would you do in this case study if you were the national?
If you're at the what?
Association. If you were the Players Association to resolve the situation, what would you offer, and how would you try and make that work?
Well, I think their approach, I think, you know, with, you know, kind of the trade-off that I mentioned, right? So having a cap, but not tying salary to revenue, I think that's, you know, one kind of good give and take. I think also, and I can't remember, and I don't remember if it says in here, but I know in other leagues there's actually salary floor as well, because, you know, like they talked a lot about, you know, revenue sharing to help smaller markets, you know, that kind of thing. but then they have this revenue sharing, but then these other teams are not even spending any money, so they're getting money from the league, and they're barely fielding a competitive team, right? So, the Players Association might say, well, yeah, we'll accept a salary cap, but we've got to institute a salary floor as well. If you're worried about propping up these small market teams, they still got to spend that money on salaries, not line their pockets and not offer, that, you want a good arena experience, but I don't want them installing some, Morton Steakhouse in the arena. I mean, the point of the revenue sharing is to up the game. So we might agree to a salary cap, but I want you to institute a salary floor as well.
Yeah.
It's weird that the focus was more about how much they could get. I mean, like that counter offer with a $49 million salary cap, when they were like, look, we are not going to change. I think it was 42.5 million. And they're like, well, you say 42.5 million, but we're going up to 49 million. And the whole time, I mean, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't actually talk about the severe with their finances that they were having. They were in the red. And so I can understand from their perspective, the league being like, this is not negotiable. That was really the last number, because if you look at our books, which you don't believe, you're so convinced because of your blinders that you guys have on, even though we had this person come in and verify it, who's an ex-SEC guy, you are convinced that we're not telling the truth, but we are, which I believe they probably were. But there was so much like just refusal to believe that they were actually like in the red. They were like, no, you guys are hiding money. And, I think that's the part about some of those blinders or whatever those barriers were. But it got to just a crazy point where they're like, no 42.5 million. You do a 49 million or it's bust. And it was.
Well, a lot of these guys are kind of unsportsmanship, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's been a lot of contracts, like, terminated because of their behavior. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
one thing I thought was interesting about this is just the lack of, I think a lot of it just kept reminding me of the reading that we were doing and the lack of trust that exists. The players union had absolutely no trust of the NHL and of the owners. And so they said they don't care about our game. They don't care about anything. They just care about making money. And the example that, Ian, that you brought up of the SEC audit, it was a third-party review of the finances saying, yes, this is the true numbers. They just flat out refused to accept it. And so they wouldn't trust them. And I think that's one mistake that they made. I think they needed to trust them a little bit more and go to the table just with that attitude. I think instead of just having their guard up completely, go in with an attitude saying, okay, you know what, those are the numbers, great. Let's see what we can do to figure something out here. But they just kind of put their guard up and just didn't want to budge from it. And I think that was the biggest issue, is just lack of trust between the two.
Yeah. To be fair, I don't know that the league did much to merit trust. You're talking about the Levitt report, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a good point too there, Robert, because the league was they refused to actually open their books for the longest time. So they were definitely complicit in that lack of trust for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even that Levitt report, like, the ownership just did that on their own, right? Or the league, like they didn't tell the Players Association, hey, let's come. Like if they had said, okay, you nominate somebody, I nominate somebody, we'll let both people come in and look at the books. They just said, okay, I'm going to hire this guy. He's going to look at our books. Here's the report. We expect you to accept that at face value. I mean, if the league was really interested in gaining the Players Association trust, I mean, you think they would have been a little more open to working with them before that came out, right? I mean, they only let the Players Association know the day before the report was in the news, right? So that makes it look like they did it for show, not for any fact finding or discovery on behalf of the players union, right? So
just relating this to one of my other classes, so we're talking in my auditing class a little bit about this, and just when the client, in this case the NHL, refuses to let you see something, that's automatically a red flag.
Yeah.
When, especially with somebody that works so closely with them and depends on that kind of information, if they, they're not going to let you, something's up,
Yeah, I think that's the caveat, because I don't think like just a broad statement of, if you have nothing to hide, you'll let me look wherever I want. Not a big fan of that, right? I have a right to privacy, but when you guys are business partners,
Yeah.
and you're saying, I'm saying I'm bleeding money, so I'm going to cut your salary by 50%. Well, you know what? I'm going to need some data to back that up before I'm going to give you that kind of concession, right?
Yeah.
And nothing they did really entered that trust. But yeah, when in an audit or a situation like that, like if the owners never want to open the books, well, there's a reason for that.
And it's also quite common for private companies not to open their books, and that's very common. So in technology space, for example, you get software companies that are smaller, they're private, and so a company I was working for last time, we were working with some of the largest banks in the world, the top global banks, and every one of them said, we want to see your finances, and we refused to give it to them. And so we told them, well, we'll let see our auditor's report, but that's it. And it's very common for companies, because when they're getting ready to ramp up for an IPO, or they're even just selling privately, but when it's private, most people don't want to give their numbers out to anybody, even their partners. And so it's very common to use an audit firm as kind of that third-party verification.
But again, wouldn't you, like, you would be upfront with that arrangement? Like, it's not like, this big bank coming to you and you're, they've been pestering you for 6 months to see your numbers, and then you say, oh, by the way, this is going to be out in the Wall Street Journal tomorrow, but here's our books.
Yeah.
After trying to, so that's a great point. And you're right, and I agree. Like, private companies, they don't have to disclose that info, but this is, given the nature of the relationship, they needed to do at least something more to kind of show they were interested in establishing some kind of trust.
Yep. No, I agree completely.
Perfect. So that's we kind of hit two birds with one stone on that discussion. Like, if you're the NHL, what would you do to resolve it? And if you're the Players Association, what would you do to resolve it? We're kind of running short. Early, if you.
That's okay with me.
Good. I gotta go to the bathroom again.
Okay. So, do you guys have any gospel connections that you can relate to this case?
A bunch. Like, the part about being honest, and being honest in your dealings with your fellow men, this would be a really good start. Being humble, taking the humble route. There's so much that these guys could have done, even just from the Speed of Trust book that they could have done. There's obviously a ton of gospel topics like interwoven into that Speed of Trust book in different vernacular. But they just selfish to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. These sports CBA negotiations always drive me a little crazy. Because for whatever reason, I find it interesting that the general public tends to side with the owners almost all the time, whether it's an individual holding out of training camp, or in a case like this, well, the players are just being greedy. Well, the players are the ones generating the revenue. The owners have the risk, and I get that. But the players are the players are the actual product. So, they have a right, like they talked about, like the right to marketing their image, right? That kind of thing. Like the owners are profiting a lot off of this. And so I don't really have any problem with, the players trying to make sure it's an equitable arrangement. But yeah, be honest with your fellow man. I think that's a big one.
I like the mediation bit of it all. I love mediation.
Yeah.
That was awesome. I'm glad it worked out.
And you do have to be humble, right? That's part of the problem, is that, these owners are generally successful, business people, and as a general rule, you don't get there by having a small ego, and pride gets in the way of these negotiations. Well, they're going to take this, they're just lucky they get to play, right? So I'm not giving them anything, and sometimes you have to. A dose of humility would do great for
is it
a lot of
interesting?
these people.
Is it interesting that the Savior is our mediator?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I found the link. I just clicked on the link that I sent you about the questions that you were following, and I'm so disappointed that at the end it doesn't say what happened. What they're doing is they're telling us
ongoing.
What they're saying is prior to meeting with your group, conduct research to learn what happened. What was the real world outcome?
We didn't really have time for that.
Yeah, so it says share this information with your group. Well, what I want to know is what obviously we're seeing in the NHL again, and for the last 12 years we've been seeing it, since this problem or however long ago that happened.
Yeah.
But I would like to know the details. Does anyone know what happened?
Well, so there was a lockout in 04-05, and then they actually had another one. So that agreement was like 7 years, right? So went through 2012. Because they had option years, and I think the Players Association extended through 2012. In 13, there was another lockout, and I think that was from
Is that the whole season as well? The whole
season? So they signed an agreement in January, and so they had the shortened season, and ended up with a 10-year deal. So they still continue to have challenges with their relationship, and I remember thinking at the time, like in the 04-05 lockout, I remember thinking, well, hockey's trying to get paid like baseball, football, and basketball, but they're not as popular as baseball, football, and basketball. They're still very much a niche sport, right? They've had everybody's gained more and more money, but at the same time, they're still trying to, they're trying to get more and more, right? I like the players were the contracts were getting a little bit out of control because owners start bidding against each other and get stupid, and so then the salaries get higher and higher and higher. But like looking at the end of the some of the data and the percentage of revenue going to player salaries compared to some of the other sports, like it surprised me that the NHL was that high. 76%. That's ideal, right? Where you want it. And owners obviously they want to make a little more money, and you do have to reinvest, right? You got to build bigger arenas to increase ticket revenue, add technology to help with broadcast rights and broadcast revenue, that kind of thing. So there was another lockout. I'm trying to look up the details.
So I just looked it up. So
Yeah.
Actually, they changed the way they did the draft so that all teams had a chance.
That's right. I remember that. Yeah.
And then they did end up going with the salary cap. I don't see where it says what the salary cap was. But it says to ease the transition to the salary cap, teams were allowed 1 week to buy out players at 2/3 the cost of their remaining contract, which would not count against the salary cap. Bought out players could not re-sign with the same team.
Yeah, that's a common provision when you have any kind of significant change in a labor deal. Basketball did that too,
Like
with the structure and season.
It's like 10 years long too, I guess. This last.
Yeah, it's a 10-year agreement. So the salary, they did institute a salary floor. So the floor was $44 million and the cap was $60 million.
But they can spend up to $70 million.
Yeah, it was prorated to give teams a couple years to adjust to the new cap. Let's see. It changed arbitration terms a little bit. Yeah, and then the amnesty, like you talked about. Yeah.
And
I think those lockouts are terrible. I mean, it's like a no-win for everybody. Like they punish them so hard, so severely.
It drives
they
me crazy,
punish
man.
the player, the fan. they punish themselves by
Yeah.
not bringing in the revenue. It's like, why you gotta be so power hungry? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on with these two.
Yeah, I almost
does
wonder if it
seem
would have
as
been
Oh,
better
sorry.
if they would have started off with getting a mediator involved. Because when you look at the barriers that it talked about, it talked about the structural barriers, which you really can't change, the tactical barriers, which is what you really want to negotiate, but then the psychological barriers, which is what they were focused on, I think.
Right.
I think they were just all pulling in their emotions, and they weren't sitting down and saying, okay, how do we get to the end goal? And that's where mediators come in helpful, is just to get rid of all that psychological barriers and
Start with
focus on
common
what
goal.
needs to be done. Yep. And if they would have done that at the beginning instead of just bickering between themselves, they probably could have got to it a lot faster.
And I
16
remember,
hours of negotiation.
yeah,
That's crazy.
yeah. I think both sides were more interested in winning than coming to an agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember I asked my boss at the time. I think this would have been. I worked there 03 to 08, so it might have been the 0405 lockout. I asked him one time, we were talking. I said, why do they wait till the last minute? Right? You have this deadline. Why don't you guys sit down and come to terms? And he says, well, nobody wants to, like, you come early, immediately you start compromising, right? So you give things up. So the earlier you start, the more you feel like you have to give up. And I'm like, I guess that kind of makes sense, but that's still kind of a poor attitude if you're really interested in coming to an agreement.
So Robert, I hear that and I see that, but you gotta, and I'm not going to deny that that's how it is, because it is. No one wants to appear weak. But
Right.
even upon that whole system, the whole thing is completely bankrupt of the possibility of trust. It's built
Right.
around mistrust.
Yep. Yeah.
And I think it's a bummer because, there will be a lockout, there will be some strike, it will be either a lockout or a strike at the end of this next CBA, at the end of that 10 years. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad it's at least 2 years though.
And I think too, like that's one of the things in negotiation, right? You never want to be the first one to offer a price, right? You watch like things like Pawn Stars and some other shows like that, or like the first one to offer a price, that they're either going to have to pay more than they offered, or they're not going to get as much as they're asking. Right. So you always try to get the other party to offer a price first.
Yeah. Well, it's just how it is. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. Regardless, you're going to have a huge following. A ton of people are going to like NHL. They'll just be annoyed and they'll flip the channel when they're locked out. And then when they finally start playing again, they'll be like, "Oh, good. I'm going to turn this back channel. I'll be back."
Yeah, and the thing is, like, as fans, like we don't really care about arbitration, right? We're like, why are the players arguing about this? Well, arbitration might be a significant thing for them, but we don't care. We don't want to know how the sausage is made, right? It doesn't matter to us. So.
One thing I thought was interesting is when reading this is that I used to go to Toronto, Canada a lot. We had customers up there, so I spent a lot of time in Toronto, Canada. And hockey is huge, obviously, in Canada. Everybody knows that. And Toronto has one of the worst teams, one of the worst hockey leagues. But it was always full. You could never get tickets for it. Every time I was up there, I tried to get tickets a couple weeks before. You could never ever get in, even a month or so before. I could never get tickets, so I was never able to go because they're always sold out. And they said it was just that way. You just couldn't get seats because they love their hockey, and they go no matter how bad the team is, they still go. And it just made me think about it just made me think about this, where the owners are in the red, the stadium is full. So how do you fix that? If it isn't by, capping salaries or things like that, when the stadium's completely full, tickets are sold out, you're going to have to drive the cost of tickets up more. You're going to have to reduce salaries. You're going to have to do something. Yeah. So I thought it was really interesting when I was reading that, just of how popular it is up there.
Yeah.
And most of the hockey is in Canada. And
Right.
most of the fans are up there. And it's sold out, flat out. At least in the big cities it is.
That reminds me of.
What did you guys?
Go ahead, Susan.
Sorry. Oh, I was just gonna say you were asking about tying it in to a gospel connection. What did you guys think of the term free agency? When I saw that, I was like, oh, cool.
Different kind of agent.
Yeah.
Right. And the unrestricted free agency.
I mean, you still.
Anyway.
The right to that choice is still pretty essential, right? And I think we get to choose. If I play for the Stars or the Black, I mean, with the choice, if the Blackhawks don't offer you a contract, you're not going to play for them.
I guess there's several kinds of
Agency is
hockey
important.
league agency.
Well, they have restricted free agent, unrestricted free agent.
Yeah.
Different contract terms.
Yeah.
Philip, that reminded me. I remember when I was just a wee lad. One of the first real jobs I had. This was probably 01 or 02 maybe. So 15, 16 years ago. I helped my boss. He was a warehouse manager, so he managed the warehouse and then the team of truck drivers that our company employed, and we showed our cost reduction initiatives, and I can't remember the number. I'll have to see if I can find it, but for our company, the way the cost structure was based on revenue, like for us to reduce cost by 5% for an So that was effect A on the bottom line. For an equal effect on the bottom line by increase of revenue, they would have had to increase revenue by like 180% or something. I mean, it was this huge difference. Like a very, very small cost reduction resulted in a much better P&L. And to match that effect, I mean, on the revenue side, I mean, it was something. It was a gigantic number. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's much better to a penny saved is a dollar earned type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
All right. Does anybody have anything else to add?
Nope. These are always fun discussions.
Yeah, not about this. It was super interesting discussion, but it's about our next and I guess final meeting. So do we have another hangout on air for
our final meeting? But I don't know.
Ian, are you excited for this to be over?
Look, I'm
we do it.
so excited for this class. I love you guys, and the class has been great, but I am done.
Yeah, I'm done.
Mentally,
I know, buddy. I know.
I have no problem admitting.
I know. It's super. Why do they have this scheduled so like our kids are home and we're trying to do homework? Like I have my summer when Logan's going back to school. I'm like, dude, can we please make this mesh a little bit better somehow? Like start earlier. I think fall classes don't even start till what, the middle of September?
Yeah.
Yeah, they need to like scoot it back a little bit, or you know what I mean?
Well, they're able to like accommodate like so many more students by doing it.
because they do the 3 semesters. Yeah, they add like it increases attendance by like 50% or something, I think.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
So we do have a hangout next week. We're supposed to present our results from the accountability project.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
So it shouldn't take too long. It says 5 to 7 minutes each, so it should be half an hour or less.
Do we do one recording for everybody, or does everybody have to do their own recording?
No, I think it's one.
I have no idea.
I think it's one for everyone. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I don't know how up to date my schedule is here, but Monday's okay if you guys want to meet Monday.
Yeah, is Monday okay with everybody?
I think so. Let me pull up. I printed out my schedule at work.
And if we could do 8 o'clock y'all's time on Monday, that would be good for me. I can do earlier if we need to, but 8 would be better for me.
8's good for me too.
I can do 8.
Okay.
Yeah.
Flat balls.
Yeah.
What was that, Seth?
I can do that. That's fine. Monday's like my only free day next week. Because I have graduation on Tuesday and we're going out Wednesday morning to leave. So
yeah, no worries.
Oh, let's hang up. I gotta go to bed. Are we good?
Yep. Monday at 8.
Monday 8 p.m. Pacific. Then.
Yep.
Yeah.
8 Pacific. Yeah.
You guys, thank you.
Right.
Rock on with your bad self.
Thanks.
See y'all.
Hey.